Hey everyone, tonight we're doing something a little different. No exploding philosophers, no vending machines of doom, just the soft, speculative chaos of imagining how history could have gone. The missed chances, the wrong turns, the cosmic what-ifs that make historians weep and conspiracy theorists drool. So, before you get comfortable, go ahead and like the video and subscribe to the channel, but only if you genuinely enjoy lying awake wondering whether Napoleon could have had a TikTok. Let me know in the comments what time it is for you and where are you watching from. It always amazes me. Now dim the lights, fluff the pillow of historical curiosity, and let's drift into a world that almost happened but didn't. Sleep softly, and try not to worry about how close we came to being ruled by Mongolian space marines. Imagine a world where the Library of Alexandria never burned, where the scrolls weren't turned to ash, the marble halls weren't reduced to rubble, and ancient knowledge didn't vanish in smoke and panic. A world where curious minds didn't have to reinvent math every few centuries, or wait until the Renaissance to rediscover the obvious. In this timeline, the library survives. And the world, frankly, gets very weird very fast. Let's start with the basics. The Library of Alexandria, founded over 2,000 years ago, was the internet of the ancient world minus the trolling and pop-up ads. It stored hundreds of thousands of scrolls: philosophy, astronomy, medicine, mathematics, engineering, you name it. Knowledge from Greece, Egypt, India, Babylon, maybe even stuff from places we've forgotten existed. If it was written, it was copied and shelved by candlelight. And then, well, someone sneezed too close to an oil lamp, or a war got a little too close, or a Caesar got too stabby. The fire came, and history's hard drive was wiped. But what if it hadn't been? First of all, human flight probably happens by the year 500, not the Wright brothers hopping over a field with canvas and hope real flight. Leonardo da Vinci doesn't need to sketch helicopters in secret, because he's already teaching theoretical physics at a university built inside a pyramid. People are building gliders, hot air balloons, maybe even figuring out jet propulsion long before anyone invents buttons. Medicine is completely different. Forget bloodletting and leeches for every ailment. Ancient Indian and Egyptian surgical techniques, combined with Greek anatomical studies, create early hospitals that actually know what they're doing. Sterilization is discovered before soap becomes popular. Anesthesia isn't a whack on the head, it's plant-based, measured, and somehow smells like cinnamon. Religion? Philosophy? Even weirder. Imagine a world where Buddhist texts, Greek dialogues, and Egyptian rituals cross-pollinate in real time. A kid grows up debating Aristotle and Confucius in the same classroom. Socratic reasoning meets Hindu cosmology and invents a whole new way to be wrong on purpose. And everyone's fluent in at least 3 dead languages that never died. Now, technology. Steam engines happened by 800 CE. Computers, yes. Actual analog computers be the 1400s. Electricity isn't a 19th century parlor trick. It's powering amphitheaters, while Europe is still figuring out forks. By the time 2024 rolls around, we're probably terraforming Mars and having emotional breakdowns on Saturn's moon because our therapists are AI programs built using algorithms from lost Babylonian dream analysis techniques. But of course, it wouldn't be perfect. Knowledge accelerates everything, war included. Imagine the Crusades, but with better logistics and functioning artillery. Or Roman legions, with basic chemistry and early explosives. History speeds up, but so does the chaos. Mistakes happen faster, louder, and in higher resolution. Still, for every disaster, there's a cure found, a bridge built, a disease prevented decades early. And what about you, lying there with your phone, your light, your connection to more information than a Roman ever dreamed of? You are already living in the future the library hinted at. The difference is that your knowledge fits in your pocket, while theirs fit inside a marble temple by the sea. So, sleep now and dream of papyrus scrolls and moon colonies, of candlelit discoveries and cities that never forgot what they once knew. In another world, Alexandria still stands. Maybe in your dreams you can visit. Julius Caesar wakes up on March 15th with a mild headache, a bad feeling, and the lingering echo of his wife's warning, "Stay home, or you'll be very dead." In our timeline, he shrugs, goes to the Senate, and gets Swiss cheesed by a bunch of senators in bed sheets. But in this version, he listens. He skips the Senate. He dodges the knives. Brutus is left holding a very unused dagger and a very awkward excuse. History exhales and then spirals into something completely different. First off, Rome doesn't return to a republic, not even a pretend one. Caesar stays alive, finishes becoming the emperor in everything but name, and rules with a combination of charisma, ruthless efficiency, and truly spectacular robes. No more shared power. No more Senate pretending to be in charge. Just Caesar, front and center, with a calendar already renamed after himself, and a very clear plan to make Rome eternal. His survival sends ripples everywhere. Octavian, his grandnephew and heir, doesn't rise to power, at least not yet. Mark Antony, still ambitious and still very loud, becomes Caesar's favorite party general instead of a rival. Cleopatra, still in the picture, but now part of an official alliance, not a secret romance doomed by political drama. Rome gets Egyptian grain, gold, and eyeliner. Egypt gets Roman engineering and Latin phrases tattooed on everything. With Caesar in charge, the empire stabilizes much earlier. No messy civil war, no long power struggle. The Roman military reforms are finished, the provinces are pacified, and roads are built faster than gossip travels. Infrastructure booms. So does culture. Caesar, ever the showman, invests in massive amphitheaters, public art, and because this is Caesar, an annual festival in his own honor featuring lion parades and fireworks before fireworks exist. He also dabbles in fashion. The toga gets shorter. Gold-threaded sashes become mandatory for senators. He commissions a line of coinage where his profile becomes more flattering each year. Eventually, mirrors are banned unless they reflect favorably. It gets weird, but weirdly organized. Religion shifts too. The imperial cult begins sooner. Caesar, never one to miss a branding opportunity, leans into the God on Earth title just hard enough to make temples stylish again. You can pray to Jupiter, sure, but Caesar hears you faster, especially if you make a small donation. But not everything is stable. The Senate still hates him. Their knives don't vanish. They just wait. Caesar grows paranoid. His trust narrows. He replaces half the Senate with friends, relatives, and people who owe him money. Democracy, such as it was, quietly dies in a closet somewhere around year 5. Still, Rome prospers. The empire expands deeper into Germania, possibly even beyond the known world. With no major civil war to drain resources, they develop faster public sanitation improves, literacy spreads, and Caesar begins talks with distant kingdoms that, in our world, never even heard of Rome. Trade routes thicken, gold flows, so do egos. And what about the world beyond? Without the chaos that followed Caesar's death, Christianity remains a minor sect. The Pax Romana stretches longer. Modern borders warp beyond recognition. You, reading this now, might be living in a westernized version of Gaul, still technically under the Holy Caesarian Empire, eating olives with your genetically engineered dog and swearing in Latin. So sleep, citizen of a world that could have been. Dream of undagged emperors and marble cities where the sun never sets. In one timeline, Caesar listens and Rome never stops talking. It starts in the east, as so many storms do. The Mongols have already thundered through Asia, Persia, and Russia, like an unstoppable force wearing fur coats and moral ambiguity. In our timeline, their westward momentum stalls weather, logistics, the death of a Khanbut in this version. None of that happens. The cavalry keeps coming. Horses reach the Rhine. They don't stop. And suddenly, the question isn't if Europe falls, it's how thoroughly. Paris burns in the spring. Vienna folds after a brief but humiliating defense involving poorly dug trenches and several nobles getting lost in their own gardens. Rome braces, hoping its spiritual clout will matter to a people who worship sky gods and strategy. It doesn't. The Pope is relocated. Gengisor, rather, one of his very focused grandsons, rides into the Vatican on a war horse, surveys the art, and uses the Sistine Chapel as a stable for exactly 1 week before getting bored. But this isn't just about conquest. This is about transformation. Because once the Mongols are in, they don't just break things. They repurpose them. Roads become trade routes. Cathedrals become administrative hubs. Latin gets sidelined for a Mongol-Latin hybrid dialect that sounds like someone shouting instructions while riding a horse backward. Your landlord's name is Batu Khan, and rent is paid in grain, silver, or loyalty. Feudalism collapses, not gradually violently. The idea of nobles owning land while peasants do all the work doesn't sit well with a people who value merit over bloodline. If you can shoot a bird off a galloping ox's back, congratulations, you get promoted. If you can't, maybe you're better off baking bread or forging weapons. Social mobility becomes a literal phrase. You rise by riding well. Technology spreads fast. The Mongols are excellent at stealing good ideas and mailing them across continents. Gunpowder becomes widespread in Europe a century earlier. So do compasses, paper money, and really aggressive postal systems. A letter sent from Lisbon arrives in Beijing 2 weeks later, accompanied by a horseman who looks mildly disappointed in your handwriting. Religions adapt or perish. Christianity isn't banned, but it's not the main event anymore. Churches that cooperate become cultural centers under Mongol protection. Those that resist become empty shellsore homes for falcons. Missionaries learn to wear fur and respect yurts. The Bible is translated into Mongolian script with an alarming number of war metaphors. Culturally, things get strange. French cuisine meets steppe rations. You get croissants filled with fermented mare's milk, Hungarian poetry written on felt banners, Italian opera about horses. Nobles trade their tights for boots and braided hair. Parisian fashion now includes bone jewelry and archery scars. And what about the future? The Renaissance doesn't look quite the same. Leonardo da Vinci is commissioned not by Medici bankers, but by a Mongol general curious about flying machines that could scout enemy territory faster. The Enlightenment is less about salons and more about campfire debates under the stars. Napoleon never rises, he's too short to meet the cavalry standards. In the modern world, this alternate Europe is a sprawling, multi-ethnic empire with silk highways and thunder in its veins. The EU never forms, but the Great Khanate of the West functions as a decentralized alliance of warrior states, poets, and mathematicians. Your morning espresso is served in a horn cup. Your Uber arrives on horseback. So sleep now, knowing that in some timeline, the Mongols didn't stop at the gates. They came in, redecorated, and turned all of Europe into a saddlebag of history's most efficient chaos. Dream of hooves on cobblestone, of yurts in Tuscany, of a world where Paris neighs. It starts with a sneeze, or rather, the absence of one. In this timeline, the Spanish don't bring smallpox, or at least not in a form that wipes out 90% of the local population before the fight even begins. The Aztecs are ready. They've heard about the pale men with metal skin and loud sticks, and they're not impressed. Their scouts have been watching, their generals have been planning, and their priests are sharpening obsidian with a look in their eyes that says, "Not today, Hernan." When Cortés arrives, he finds not awe, but annoyance. The gifts he receives aren't offerings, they're warnings. Moctezuma doesn't hesitate. He doesn't see a god. He sees a problem in need of solving. And for once, the omens line up. The volcanoes are calm, the stars are smug, and the jaguar priests are unusually optimistic. When the Spanish try to seize the capital, they find themselves in a city designed like a floating maze and defended by warriors who've been playing strategic ball games since they could walk. Tenochtitlan doesn't fall. It adapts. Cannons are copied, dissected, rebuilt with volcanic stone and flaming chili paste. Horses are terrifying, yes, but they're not immortal. Soon, they're being ridden by eagle warriors in feathered armor who really know how to make an entrance. The conquistadors retreat. The empire takes notes. But this isn't just about survival, it's about evolution. With the invaders repelled, the Aztec Empire consolidates. They unify their neighbors, sometimes through diplomacy, sometimes through reminders that they still know how to remove a heart without blinking. But the blood rituals become rarer, more symbolic. The gods still need feeding, sure, but maybe not daily, maybe just on weekends. Trade flourishes. With the Spanish gone, other European powers approach more carefully. The Portuguese send envoys instead of soldiers. The Chinese show up with treasure ships and polite curiosity. Tenochtitlan becomes a hub of global commerce, with floating gardens supplying avocados and obsidian iPhone cases to the world. Writing systems evolve. Codices are printed on maize-based paper and translated into dozens of languages. Aztec mathematicians use base 20 to do things that confuse European scholars for centuries. Engineers begin building canals that rival Venice and pyramids that double as observatories. Astronomy becomes national pride. So do golden nose ornaments. Christianity still arrives, but as a guest, not a conqueror. The Virgin Mary gets a makeover involving feathers and serpents. Jesus becomes oddly okay with cocoa offerings. Churches and temples sit side by side, occasionally exchanging awkward glances during festivals. Culturally, it gets weird in the best way. Ritual ball games are broadcast via runners to distant cities. Pop songs include references to rain, gods, and corn. School children memorize poems about jaguars and solar cycles. And yes, human sacrifice lingers in the cultural memory, but now it's more of a metaphor, like jury duty. And you, modern dreamer, might live in a world where the Americas aren't carved up by foreign flags, where the pyramids of Tenochtitlan stand next to airports, where Aztec culture isn't a museum exhibit, but a living, breathing civilization with its own holidays, hot sauces, and space program. So sleep now, and picture a skyline of stone temples and solar panels, a world where obsidian shines brighter than gold, and where, in some version of history, the Aztecs stood their ground and history blinked first. The fields of Waterloo are quiet just for a moment, and then they erupt, but not in defeat. This time, Napoleon wins. Maybe the mud holds off. Maybe the Prussians show up late, distracted by waffles. Maybe his famously temperamental hemorrhoids take the day off. Whatever the reason, the French lines hold. The British falter. The Duke of Wellington is forced to retreat with an expression that will later be immortalized as deeply unimpressed. And suddenly, Europe belongs to a man with a tiny hat and very large ambitions. With the coalition shattered, Napoleon wastes no time. He re-establishes the French Empire, stronger and smugger than ever. The Bourbon monarchy is once again shown the door, this time with a note that says, "Do not return seriously." France, under Napoleon's very intense eye, becomes the center of everything: politics, fashion, science, pastry. The Eiffel Tower is built 50 years early, primarily so Napoleon has somewhere to stand and judge people from. Language follows empire. French becomes the default in diplomacy, science, and annoying conversations at cafes. English never gets a global grip. It's still spoken, of course, but mostly by poets, farmers, and people who've never been properly colonized. Your spell check is now in French. You dream in French. Your dog only responds to asses. With Europe firmly under French control, the world order reshuffles. Colonies don't vanish, they just change flags. French India thrives, mostly on spicy cheese. French Africa becomes a massive trading empire where baguettes are served with everything, including political lectures. The Americas look on with quiet panic. The United States, wary of this new empire, leans harder into isolationism. They still get the Louisiana Territory, but only because Napoleon uses the sale as a joke and refers to it forever as that unfortunate land full of bad coffee. Technology accelerates, but differently. Instead of steam-powered factories in soot-covered Britain, you get elegant mechanical contraptions run by artisans in silk cravats. The Industrial Revolution wears cologne. Electricity arrives, but so does state-sponsored ballet. Art and science are fused literally. The first airplane is shaped like a swan. The first computer speaks with a Parisian accent and corrects your grammar. Education shifts. Napoleon, obsessed with meritocracy, institutes national schools across his empire. History is rewritten to include more battles where he won and fewer where he didn't. Children recite math equations while wearing military epaulets. Discipline is tight, but so are the uniforms. War, of course, continues. It always does. But now it's French-led, French-styled, and narrated by moody philosophers. When rebellions rise in distant corners, they are crushed by troops who quote Voltaire while charging. Resistance is both futile and fashionable. And what about you? You live in a world where croissants are a sacred rite, where every city has a street named after Napoleon, at least one, and where your passport says République Mondiale Française. Your phone autocorrects to French sarcasm. Your flag has blue, white, red, and possibly glitter. So sleep now, mon ami. In some timeline, the French did not fall at Waterloo. They rose, and they never shut up about it. It's 1865, and everything goes wrong depending on who you ask. General Lee doesn't surrender. The Confederate armies dig in, hold ground, and receive just enough international support to tip the scales. Maybe Britain sends ships. Maybe France gets bored. Maybe Lincoln trips down some stairs at exactly the wrong moment. However it happens, the South wins. The United States becomes the divided states, and a new flag rises over Richmond, proudly terrible in both design and ethics. Slavery continues not just as an institution, but as an industry. The Confederacy, built on cotton and cruelty, doubles down. With victory comes legitimacy, and with legitimacy comes expansion. They eye the Caribbean, Mexico, maybe even Central America. The dream of a golden circle, a slave empire, stretching through the tropics suddenly seems horrifyingly possible. Meanwhile, the North doesn't just sit in silence. The Union is humiliated, wounded, and bitter. They rebuild, militarize, and seethe. Think Cold War, but with railroads and mustaches. The Mason-Dixon line becomes more than a border. It becomes the fault line of two Americas, each claiming to be the real one. Diplomats bristle, spies flourish, maps get political. The cultural divide hardens. The Confederate States evolve into an oligarchy, where plantation owners run everything and the word freedom is only used ironically. Education is for the wealthy. History is rewritten with lots of boties, and technology advances just slowly enough to keep the old system intact. It's a land of steamboats, top hats, and absolutely no progress. In the Union, things get weirdly intense. Freed Black Americans still fight for rights, but now in a country obsessed with proving how not Confederate it is. Northern industrialism booms. Immigration surges. Cities explode upward while the South stagnates in a sepia-toned fantasy. Jazz, skyscrapers, and newspapers all belong to the North. The Confederacy clings to mint juleps and increasingly bad poetry. Internationally, the split is awkward. Europe plays both sides, mostly for trade. The Confederacy sells cotton, the Union sells steel, and both pretend the other doesn't exist unless absolutely necessary. Embassies get built, then burned, then built again. Canada builds a really big fence. By the 20th century, technology forces the issue. Cars don't care about borders. Neither do radios, movies, or diseases. Slavery becomes a diplomatic nightmare. The Confederacy, desperate to maintain its way of life, isolates further. Protests rise. Uprisings brew. The world watches in discomfort. Eventually, change comes not with a bang, but with a long, ugly unraveling. It turns out you can't build a modern nation on a 17th century worldview forever. In our present day, you're living in a world where that split still echoes. Imagine two Americas side by side, each pretending the other doesn't exist. One celebrates Juneteenth, the other bans it. One launches rockets, the other debates the morality of railroads. History textbooks are printed in two versions. People cross the border not for opportunity, but for oxygen. So rest now, under a single flag that almost wasn't. In another timeline, the South wanted, the world learned just how fragile freedom really is. It's a crisp evening in the 1890s, and Nikola Tesla stands triumphantly in front of a room full of very confused financiers. He's just lit up a series of light bulbs without wires, made sparks dance between metal coils, and mumbled something poetic about the Earth itself being a conductor. In this timeline, the audience claps. Not politely, wildly. Someone throws money. Someone else cries. And just like that, Tesla wins. Edison, meanwhile, sits in his office surrounded by direct current batteries and the creeping realization that charisma alone cannot stop the march of alternating current. His light bulbs still work, but so does Tesla's vision, and Tesla's doesn't require a power plant every 5 blocks. In our world, Edison was the PR wizard. But here, Tesla becomes the profit engineer. And the future gets strange. The first thing that changes is the grid, because there isn't one. Instead of cities strung together by thick cables and humming transformers, power is broadcast through the air. Towers sprout like metallic mushrooms, sending out pulses of energy to homes, factories, and street lamps. The phrase, "plug it in," disappears from the language. You just turn it on. Or think about turning it on. And it does. Homes look different. No cords, no outlets. Everything runs on ambient electricity. Even your grandfather's weird lamp with the tassels. Vacuum cleaners hum softly without wires. Toasters levitate slightly, because why not? You charge your phone by putting it vaguely near a window and whispering encouragement. Tesla's obsession with wireless communication pays off earlier too. By the 1910s, global messaging is instantaneous. Telegrams are replaced by telethoughts. Radio develops faster, morphs into early television, then mutates into something that looks suspiciously like the internet by the 1930s. Instead of servers and wires, it's all signal-based. You don't log on, you tune in. And the mustaches. Oh, the mustaches. Tesla's success makes him a cultural icon, and fashion follows. His high-collared suits and haunted inventor gaze become the template for professional style. Every high school yearbook has at least one teen attempting the Tesla swoop. The world of science becomes theatrical. Engineers wear opera capes. Physicists give lectures with dramatic lighting. Technology isn't just practical, it's personal, mystical, almost sacred. Medicine advances too. With global communication and free-floating electricity, hospitals can power devices in rural areas without infrastructure. Medical scanners arrived decades early. Remote surgeries happened by the 50s. Tesla's dream of harnessing the planet's energy turns into a healthcare system that doesn't completely break under pressure, though it still charges you for the gauze. But it's not all glowing coils and utopian cities. Tesla's vision, unchecked, has its flaws. Ambient electricity messes with bird migration. Occasionally, people get mild static shocks when they hug. A few early experiments with atmospheric transmission end in sheep floating a few inches off the ground. And privacy? Non-existent. When everything's wireless, everything listens. Still, the benefits outweigh the chaos. The world runs cleaner, faster, freer. Corporations can't monopolize power plants, they can barely locate them. The idea of paying for electricity becomes quaint. And climate change? Delayed, maybe even dodged, because the world didn't need coal to begin with. So sleep now, humming gently beneath your wireless blanket. In one version of history, Tesla won, and the world became a cathedral of static and starlight. The car makes the right turn. That's it. That's the whole alternate timeline. Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary, riding in an open-top car in Sarajevo, does not turn down the street where Gavrilo Princip, amateur assassin and professional sandwich seeker, happens to be standing with a gun and a headache. The Archduke survives. He goes to the museum or the hospital, or maybe just back to Vienna, where he tells people how oddly warm the Balkans are. History exhales. And doesn't explode. Without that fateful shot, Europe remains tense, but intact. The dominoes, never fall. Austria-Hungary doesn't declare war on Serbia. Russia doesn't mobilize. Germany doesn't panic. France doesn't light a match. Britain doesn't mail in the cavalry. And millions of young men do not march into trenches to die over treaties and miscommunications. World War I never happens, not in 1914, and maybe not at all. Which means the 20th century never learns to bleed quite so efficiently. Without the war, the old empires limp along longer than they should. Austria-Hungary stays a mismatched patchwork of languages, loyalties, and lunch meats. The Ottoman Empire coughs its way into the 1920s. Russia doesn't snap into revolution, at least not yet. The Tsar still has problems, but without the war bleeding his resources dry, he hangs on longer. Lenin remains a passionate exile, shouting in dusty cafes, and Stalin stays just another angry mustache in a crowd of angry mustaches. The lack of war means the Treaty of Versailles never happens, which means Germany isn't punished into madness. No reparations, no inflation that requires a wheelbarrow for bread, no rage-fueled nationalism building in beer halls. Adolf Hitler? A failed artist, yes, but one without a political springboard. He dies ranting about perspective and bad critiques, not conquering Poland. Without World War I, there's no need for World War II. No Holocaust, no atomic bombs, no Cold War. Just a world that continues being problematic at a more leisurely, less explodey pace. Technology evolves differently. War, as awful as it is, tends to speed up innovation. Without the push for better planes, radar, and synthetic rubber, the modern world arrives slower. You still get airplanes and antibiotics, but maybe by 1950 instead of 1930. Tank development is reserved for parades, not trench assaults. Einstein keeps teaching, not warning the U.S. government about theoretical fireballs. The moon landing still happens, but more out of curiosity than panic. Colonialism unravels more slowly. Without European powers bankrupted and shaken, they hold on to their overseas territories longer. Independence movements still rise, but it's a grind, not a blaze. The global South is delayed in taking back its voice. History gets less dramatic, but also less just. And what about you? You live in a world without Remembrance Day, without war poetry, without grainy black and white footage of mud, blood, and gas masks. Your great-grandfather doesn't limp. Your grandmother doesn't ration sugar. History textbooks are thinner, less grim, still chaotic, but in a less industrialized death kind of way. So sleep now, in a world that almost shattered because of a wrong turn. In another timeline, the car drove past, the gun stayed cold, and the 20th century never learned how loud it could scream. In this version of history, the Academy of Fine Arts Vienna takes one look at young Adolf Hitler's application, squints at his charcoal renderings of old buildings and grumpy dogs, and stamps it. No, thank you. Again, a second rejection. And just like that, the world dodges a genocide by the width of a portfolio. Hitler, devastated but not yet historically catastrophic, leaves the admissions office with a heavy coat, a heavier ego, and nowhere to go. The streets of Vienna don't welcome him. Art galleries don't return his letters. He sells a few postcards of Gothic architecture and moody landscapes to disinterested tourists, but mostly he broods. And yet, without the momentum of political rage and populist charisma, he remains a bitter man with a cheap mustache and a second-hand sketchpad. History, meanwhile, rearranges itself around his absence. The Nazi Party never rises. It remains a fringe club of angry nationalists who meet in poorly lit basements and argue about fonts. Without Hitler's particular cocktail of theatrical speeches, mass propaganda, and truly alarming facial expressions, fascism in Germany doesn't get its breakout star. The economic crisis of the Weimar Republic is still bad, but it doesn't end with swastikas on government buildings. It ends with parliamentary gridlock, grumbling, and maybe a few too many sausage metaphors in political cartoons. World War II, as we know it, never happens. No blitzkrieg, no concentration camps, no 6-year descent into mechanized horror. Instead, Europe's wounds from World War I heal slowly, awkwardly, and with much therapy. Germany still wants to recover its pride, but does it with trade deals and Wagner festivals, not tanks and genocide. The global Jewish population remains vibrant and uninterrupted. There is no Holocaust. Entire branches of families never go missing. The cultural, scientific, and artistic contributions of millions of people are not extinguished. Einstein still leaves Germany, possibly still sensing trouble, but he doesn't have to write urgent letters about nuclear bombs. The Manhattan Project is just a speculative physics conference with slightly more chalkboards. The United States stays more isolated for longer. There's no Pearl Harbor to drag them into the war. Instead, their focus stays domestic. Civil rights, industrial growth, baseball. Without the military-industrial complex supercharging itself, the Cold War never goes nuclear because there's no Cold War. Russia doesn't occupy Eastern Europe. The USSR still exists, but with less paranoia and fewer James Bond villains. And what of Hitler? In this timeline, he fades. Maybe he moves to Munich, opens a small gallery, teaches art classes to bored retirees who think his style is a bit intense. He paints angry dogs with slightly too many teeth. He writes a deeply unreadable memoir about suffering and watercolor technique. His name becomes a footnote in a dusty textbook about rejected artists who never caught a break. No swastikas, no speeches, just canvases filled with disappointment and bad perspective. So sleep now, knowing that somewhere in the multiverse, Hitler never climbed a podium. He just sat by a river with a sketchpad, mumbling about shading. And the world, blessedly, moved on. It's December 7, 1941. But instead of kamikaze pilots screaming over the Pacific and bombs falling on battleships, the skies over Pearl Harbor are quiet. The U.S. Pacific Fleet rocks gently in the harbor, unbothered. Why? Because in this timeline, Japan makes a different call. Maybe the intelligence reports are murkier. Maybe the admiral in charge gets cold feet. Maybe Tokyo decides to focus entirely on Southeast Asia and avoid poking the sleeping American giant. Whatever the reason, the strike never comes, and neither does immediate U.S. involvement in World War II. At first, nothing much changes on the surface. Americans still argue over whether they should get involved in Europe's mess, and isolationism keeps a firm grip on public opinion. Roosevelt still gives his fireside chats, but they're slightly less urgent. Instead of asking Congress to declare war, he asks Americans to buy war bonds just in case. Factories hum, but more slowly. Soldiers train, but stay stateside. The draft is delayed. Jazz still swings. Baseball continues uninterrupted. Meanwhile, Europe burns. Without American troops, the Allied forces suffer. Britain hangs on by sheer stubbornness and tea. The Soviet Union, bearing the full brunt of the Nazi war machine, loses even more lives, millions more. Germany pushes harder into the east, capturing more territory. Without the fear of a two-front war involving American intervention, Hitler becomes even more confident, which is historically a terrible sign. Japan, free from American retaliation, continues its sweep across the Pacific. The Philippines fall more quickly. Australia gets very nervous. China keeps fighting, but with fewer resources and far more chaos. The world begins to wonder if the Axis powers might just win by default. Back in America, things start to shift. As German U-boats creep closer to the East Coast and Japanese submarines lurk in the Pacific, neutrality becomes harder to defend. American ships are sunk accidentally. Public sentiment begins to shift slowly, then rapidly. By 1943, a series of attacks on American cargo vessels forces Roosevelt's hand. Congress declares war, but it's too late to turn the tide easily. U.S. troops finally land in Europe, but the beaches are bloodier. The road to Berlin is longer. The Holocaust continues unchecked for more time. When the Allies finally push through, it's not 1,945, it's 1,000 947. And the world that emerges is darker, slower to recover, and deeply divided. The Soviet Union has taken more territory. Western Europe is more fragile. The Cold War begins earlier and icier, with more mistrust and less Marshall Plan. And technology also changed. With the US late to the party, German science stays dominant longer. Jet engines, rocketry, even early computers, these all develop first in Berlin. Post-war reconstruction means that Germany, not Silicon Valley, becomes the center of tech innovation. By 2025, TikTok is a sleek, overly efficient platform run out of Frankfurt, powered by algorithms with long German compound names. American teenagers dance under the watchful eye of something called Daten-Sicherheitsverantwortung System 3. It's very organized, very fast, and mildly terrifying. So, sleep now, in a world that could have waited too long, where hesitation reshaped a century, where neutrality bought time but not peace. In some timeline, there was no Pearl Harbor. And the cost of silence was far louder than any bomb. June 6, 1944. The wind shifts just enough to scatter the smoke screens. The sea is rougher than forecasted. The paratroopers land too far off course into fields, into rivers, into well-armed German units who are already awake and cranky. The beach landings begin, but they do not go well. Omaha becomes a bloodbath with no breakthrough. The Allies cannot establish a beachhead. By nightfall, the surviving troops are either dead, captured, or retreating under fire. Operation Overlord fails. And with it, the best shot at liberating Western Europe. Germany wins the day, and it changes everything. Without the success of Day, the Nazi grip on occupied Europe tightens. France doesn't get a liberation parade, it gets more barbed wire, more Vichy collaboration, more deportations. The resistance still fights, but it does so from deeper shadows, with fewer supplies. Radio operators whisper into broken equipment, sabotage teams strike trains and vanish, and graffiti becomes the last form of protest. Free France is now a slogan etched into bathroom walls and bridge supports. The Allied war effort stalls. There are calls to try again another landing, another spot, but political will wavers. Churchill rages, Roosevelt recalculates, and Stalin just fumes. Because now, with the Western Front stuck behind barbed beaches, the Eastern Front becomes the only real path forward. The Soviet Union doesn't just break the Nazi war machine, it devours it. Inch by brutal inch, they claw their way to Berlin alone. By the time Berlin falls, the Red Army has taken half of Europe and isn't in a hurry to leave. Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Romania all swallowed into the Soviet orbit. France, without an Allied rescue, becomes a battleground between remaining Axis forces and growing communist uprisings. Italy splits again, this time into factions so messy historians will still be confused in 2040. The Cold War, in this version of history, isn't cold, it's a smoldering mess of proxy battles, collapsing empires, and whispered betrayals. NATO forms too late. The Iron Curtain drops like a guillotine across the continent. Europe becomes a checkerboard of surveillance states and makeshift democracies. Propaganda becomes currency. So do cigarettes and secrets. Culturally, the resistance movements become legend. Their posters bolder, darker, more surreal air smuggled across borders and hidden under floorboards. Artists who survive the occupation produce work that is jagged, raw, and defiantly cryptic. Literature turns sharply existential. Film noir becomes the default genre. And jazz? It's banned in some cities, weaponized in others. Back in the US, the failed day weighs heavy. The war drags on. Casualties mount. Isolationism reemerges. The American century arrives late and limping. PTSD isn't just a veteran's issue, it becomes national policy. Victory eventually comes, but it's bitter and slow and soaked in regret. And you? You live in a world that's colder, more suspicious, and full of locked doors. A world where the beaches of Normandy aren't remembered for heroism, but for failure. Where every act of resistance feels like screaming in a library. where the free world took a breath and never fully exhaled. So sleep now, in the flickering half-light of a victory that never came. In one version of history, day failed, and history had to find another way forward, one stolen radio transmission at a time. It starts with a misunderstanding, or a malfunction, or just someone's finger twitching too close to a red button. Maybe it's the Cuban Missile Crisis, but this time no one blinks. Maybe a radar picks up a flock of birds and mistakes them for missiles. Maybe a Soviet sub-captain doesn't get the memo to hold fire. Whatever the cause, in this timeline, the Cold War doesn't stay cold. It flares, it burns, and then it boils the planet. The year is 1962, and instead of quiet diplomacy behind closed doors, they're shouting, scrambling, and then silence followed by a blinding flash over the Atlantic. Within minutes, nukes are flying in every direction like angry, radioactive bees. Washington, D.C. glows for a second, and then vanishes. Moscow follows shortly. London disappears between cups of tea. Beijing gets caught in the crossfire. Paris lights up like a doomed sparkler. The world's great cities are turned into footnotes in an instant. Then comes the fallout literally. Nuclear winter descends. The sky turns gray. The sun becomes a rumor. Crops fail. Dust settles over every remaining surface, like an unwanted apocalypse-themed Instagram filter. Those who survive the initial blasts retreat underground into bunkers, tunnels, basements, stacked with canned beans and grim determination. Society is put on pause. Nobody knows who's in charge anymore. The only remaining superpower is radiation. Global communication collapses. Satellites blink out. Radio stations either go dead or play one final loop of government-approved jazz. In America, the emergency broadcast system becomes the new national anthem. In the USSR, surviving officials issue orders to other surviving officials, none of whom are entirely sure they still represent a government. The 1970s never happen, at least not in bell-bottomed, disco-lit form. Instead, the world trudges through a dim twilight era of scavenging, Geiger counters, and water purification tablets. Children are taught how to tell time using a dosimeter. Schools happen in caves. History is passed down through hushed stories and old cassette tapes. The phrase duck and cover is no longer a drill, it's a lifestyle. Technology continues, but sideways. Computers are rebuilt out of salvaged parts and desperation. The internet, if it ever arrives, is a closed-circuit thing powered by car batteries and hope. There's no World Wide Web, just a moderately successful, local area network of very careful people. Fashion becomes whatever still fits. Entertainment is a kid with a harmonica and decent aim. Culturally, things shift hard. National borders blur, replaced by survival zones and barter districts. Flags are sewn into coats to remind people where they came from. Religion surges and fragments. Some worship the old world, others curse it. A few start churches based on reruns of pre-war sitcoms. Anything that resembles light becomes sacred. And you? You're not scrolling through your phone. You're digging through the ruins of a library, hoping to find an intact book on basic plumbing. You dream of sunlight. You sleep to the sound of air filters and the distant hum of radiation. And you wonder what the world was like before everyone got too proud, too scared, and too armed to back down. So rest now, in a bed that's hopefully lead-lined. In one timeline, the Cold War turned hot, and Earth became a cautionary tale carved into melted stone. April 4, 1968. The bullet misses. Maybe the gun jams. Maybe James Earl Ray hesitates. Maybe the wind shifts, and history tilts with it. Martin Luther King Jr. doesn't fall onto a Memphis balcony that night. Instead, he flinches, stunned but alive, and the crowd scatters in confusion, not mourning. He lives. And the 20th century gets a different heartbeat. King recovers quickly. The attempt on his life only strengthens his resolve. The media swarms. Headlines scream, "King survives assassination attempt." He steps out of the hospital days later, walking slowly, flanked by Coretta and a trembling nation. His next speech delivered with a fresh bandage and a trembling voice, doesn't become his last, it becomes a rallying cry. He speaks not just of justice, but of survival, of grace under fire, of a dream too stubborn to die. The civil rights movement, already powerful, surges with new energy. King becomes more than a leader, he becomes a living symbol of resistance that bullets couldn't silence. He travels constantly, speaking in churches, stadiums, and Congress halls, urging reconciliation but never appeasement. His message sharpens. By the early 1970s, King is not only advocating for racial equality, but also economic justice, workers' rights, and an end to militarism. He launches the Poor People's Campaign with full force. Instead of a fragmented movement, it becomes a nationwide coalition. Black, white, Latino, Native, Asian marching on Washington not for one issue, but for many. The tent city on the National Mall swells. Congress can't ignore it. Media can't look away. Slowly, painfully, change inches forward. Welfare programs expand. The minimum wage rises. Housing reforms squeak through. King's voice helps delay or at least dilute the culture wars. His presence offers a counterbalance to Nixonian paranoia and Reagan-era reaction. While he doesn't stop the conservative tide, he blunts it. He continues speaking against the Vietnam War, even after it ends, warning against future conflicts, sold in pretty packaging. When the 1980s arrive, he's grayer, wearier, but still climbing podiums with sermons about unity, decency, and the hard labor of democracy. By the 1990s, he's become an elder statesman. Not universally beloved, he still threatens too many structures for that, but widely respected. Presidents meet with him. Protesters quote him. His birthday becomes a national holiday. While he's still alive to see it, he cries during the ceremony. So does the nation. And what about the present? In this timeline, the arc of justice bends a little faster. Not straight, not easy, but steadier. Police reform begins earlier. Voter suppression tactics are harder to justify. The war on drugs faces louder, earlier pushback. Black voices in media, politics, and education are not just included, they're amplified. Representation grows not as a trend, but as policy. And you? Maybe you grow up learning about King, not just as a martyr, but as a living mentor. You hear his later speeches about tech, compassion, and the soul of humanity. You watch him hug children who aren't born in our timeline. You hear him whisper from podiums and pulpits and, eventually, podcasts. So rest now, in the dream he never stopped chasing. In one version of history, Martin Luther King Jr. lived, and with him, so did a few more chances for peace. Picture it. The year is 1900, and instead of telegrams and monocles, the world is blinking into the blue glow of rudimentary screens. Somewhere in a soot-covered London lab, an inventor who smells faintly of coal dust and tea spills his flask into a stack of vacuum tubes, and through some combination of electrical serendipity and caffeine accidentally jumpstarts the information age a century too early. The internet is born, and it's got brass accents, copper wires, and absolutely zero sense of moderation. The first thing that happens is chaos, obviously. Victorian scientists scramble to connect their difference engines and pneumatic tubes to something that now pings. Wireless telegraphy evolves into electro-telegraphical mesh networking, which is exactly as awkward as it sounds. But within months, messages are being sent not just across towns but across continents faster than horses, steamships, or scandalous gossip. Queen Victoria receives her first email. It's entirely in Morse code, and it's mostly cat pictures rendered in dots and dashes. People panic, then adapt. Parliament debates whether the Ethernet constitutes a moral threat to chimney sweeps. Etiquette guides are hastily updated. You must now tip your hat not only in person, but also via a proper emoticon. Victorian influencers emerge. Their feeds are ornate scrolls decorated with botanical sketches and quotes from Lord Byron. Instead of Instagram selfies, Its elaborate cabinet card portraits, re-shared with comments like swoon or Duchess vibes. TikTok doesn't exist yet, but Vine does, in the form of 6-second kinetoscope loops played on crank-operated devices. People line up to watch a woman dance with a goose on repeat. It becomes oddly political. With the internet's arrival, information spreads, and so does misinformation. By 1905, conspiracy theories include Queen Victoria is a lizard in a bonnet, and steam engines are powered by ghosts. Forums dedicated to phrenology, the head bump thing, and alchemy boom briefly before being drowned in snarky rebuttals and ASCII art of skeptical owls. Education changes. Children are taught typing before penmanship. Libraries begin digitizing scrolls. Charles Darwin starts live blogging his updates to On the Origin of Species, sparking flame wars with bishops in real time. Scientific journals embrace peer review via comment sections, which leads to breakthrough sand, the occasional, "Your theory is trash. Good day, sir." Colonialism hits broadband speed, which, unfortunately, means so do global protest movements. Independence groups in India, Africa, and the Caribbean coordinate faster, rallying supporters and exposing imperial hypocrisies through photo leaks and sassy satirical newsletters. The British Empire finds itself not just overstretched but out-memed. The early 20th century reshapes entirely. World War I starts with soldiers live tweeting trench conditions. Diplomats accidentally leak treaties by sending them to the wrong chat thread. Propaganda posters become GIFs. The Versailles Treaty is edited in Google Docs. The Great Depression is documented in sepia-toned photo blogs with hashtags like Breadline Beauty. And you? You might have grown up with a grandmother who met your grandfather on a steam-powered dating site called CourtshipNet. Your school history class includes a unit on the Great Social Media Collapse of 1919. Your tech is bulkier. Your slang is older. Your memes? Still weird. So sleep now, dreaming of a world where telegrams turned into tweets, corsets came with USB ports, and Queen Victoria trended for her hot takes on steam engine design. In another timeline, the internet came early, and no one was ready for the comment section. Imagine it's 1973. Bell bottoms are wide, hair is feathered, and the world is in the middle of an oil crisis. Gas stations have lines stretching around corners, and everyone is mad at OPEC. But in this version of history, instead of doubling down on fossil fuels, a few key leaders decide to listen not to oil barons or lobbyists, but to the scientists nervously clearing their throats at international summits. Climate change isn't just a back-page footnote in obscure journals. It's suddenly center stage. The evidence is undeniable. Rising CO2 levels, shifting weather patterns, glaciers quietly packing their bags. The world pays attention not out of some saintly sense of virtue, but because clean energy is pitched as the cool thing to do. Oil is expensive, nuclear is risky, but wind, solar, hydroelectric, suddenly they're in. And unlike our timeline, where action was postponed until the air turned chewy, governments in this one act fast. The United States launches a Clean Tomorrow initiative, a kind of New Deal with solar panels and fewer suits. Jimmy Carter doesn't just put panels on the White House roof, quadruples their use across the country. Germany builds wind farms with the same efficiency they once used to build trains. Japan gets so good at microsolar that every vending machine runs on sunlight. Research into green tech becomes the new space race. Scientists in lab coats with sideburns compete to make the best battery, the most efficient turbine, the sexiest recycling system. Environmentalism goes mainstream, not as guilt, but as glittery optimism. Earth Day isn't a niche holiday anymore. It's an international festival with concerts, fashion, and disco balls made from repurposed tinfoil. Pop culture gets swept into it. Disco divas sing about carbon neutrality. Kids' cartoons feature solar-powered superheroes who fight smog monsters and deforestation with catchy theme songs. Hollywood makes blockbuster movies where scientists actually save the world, and nobody needs to launch Bruce Willis into space. By the 1980s, fossil fuels are on the way out. Electric cars arrive 2 decades early. Urban planning shifts towards sustainability. Public transport becomes trendy, with buses and trains retrofitted to run on clean energy and painted with wild colors that make commuting feel like a moving art exhibit. Suburbs shrink, cities green, air tastes better. International cooperation gets a boost too. Countries form the Global Climate Pact, sharing tech, data, and smug satisfaction. Climate refugees never become a headline because the disasters never scale. Coral reefs thrive. Polar bears remain just slightly menacing. The Amazon is declared a global heritage zone, patrolled by eco-rangers with jetpacks and a firm sense of boundaries. Sure, problems remain. No timeline is perfect. Corporations still try to sneak profits past regulations. A few rogue nations keep burning coal, but they're treated like that one guy at the party who brings up politics during karaoke, tolerated, but no longer respected. The difference is, the world course-corrected before the cliff edge. And you? You live in a world that never needed climate-doom documentaries, where renewable energy isn't a political wedge, it's just what works. You never had to Google, "Is it too late?" Your weather is boring in the best way possible. So sleep now, wrapped in a blanket of ozone and optimism. In this timeline, we solved climate change before it solved us, and the only thing overheating is the dance floor. It's 1969. The world is holding its breath, televisions are humming, and Neil Armstrong is supposedly about to take a giant leap for mankind. Only, he doesn't. Not really. Because in this alternate timeline, the moon landing is in fact faked, not as a rumor, not as a YouTube rabbit hole, but as a deliberate, high-budget, Hollywood-level hoax orchestrated by a panicked NASA, a nervous Pentagon, and one extremely reluctant Stanley Kubrick, dragged from his editing room mid-cigarette. The reasons are embarrassingly bureaucratic. Technical issues, budget cuts, a rocket part that wobbles more than it should, political pressure from the Cold War. They can't afford failure, and they really can't afford letting the Soviets win. So they fake it, film it, edit it, broadcast it. Humanity watches a carefully choreographed moonwalk filmed on a soundstage somewhere in Nevada, complete with dust, flag, and a script that's mostly improvisation. The lie works for a while. Buzz Aldrin becomes a reluctant actor in his own life. Armstrong can't sleep. Michael Collins, circling the Earth in a different role, is the only one who isn't sweating the cover-up because he was left out of the plan entirely. The astronauts return to parades, applause, and questions they don't want to answer. Meanwhile, Kubrick starts drinking more. But then something strange happens. NASA keeps pushing. Advances in technology accelerate. The space race heats up again. By the late 1970s, robotic probes have already done flybys of Mars. Private engineers, emboldened by the myth of the moon landing, innovate like it did happen. So eventually, the truth starts to crack and, then, hilariously, become real. By 1985, NASA finally does land someone on the moon. For real this time. No green screens, no script, just boots on regolith and genuine panic from Houston. The astronauts plant a second flag right next to the fake one someone quietly dropped there years earlier, buried under moon dust like an embarrassing time capsule. The reveal is explosive. Documents leak. A disgruntled lighting tech sells his story to the press. The fake footage is dissected frame by frame. People cry betrayal. Congressional hearings are held. Conspiracy theorists become smug beyond measure. Stanley Kubrick sues NASA for emotional damage and wins. Nixon-era officials deny everything. The word Lunar Gate trends before the internet even exists. But here's the twist. The revelation doesn't ruin space exploration, it turbocharges it. Now that the truth's out, the public demands authenticity. Real launches, real missions, real science. And to NASA's surprise, they deliver. By the early 2000s, there's a permanent moon base, a Mars mission in planning, and an entire generation of engineers who grew up on a lie but chose to build the truth. The fake moon landing becomes a bizarre origin myth. Students study it not just for history, but for ethics. Every major scientific achievement now comes with third-party verification and behind-the-scenes live streams. Transparency becomes trendier than innovation. Elon Musk still happens, unfortunately, but now he's haunted by rumors that he's secretly just rebooting the original hoax, only shinier. And you? You live in a world that learned honesty the hard way. A world where the first moon landing was fiction, but the second and the third and the 50th weren't. Where humanity failed spectacularly in secret, then succeeded messily in public. So rest easy, under a sky we actually reached. In this timeline, the moon landing was a reboot only until we made it true. It's the 20th century, and instead of collapsing in a slow-motion series of awkward independence ceremonies and flag-lowering events, the British Empire decides to double down. No messy dissolutions. No sudden goodbyes. Just one empire, extra crispy, refusing to leave the stage. The sun never sets, because the lights are on 24/7 in the bureaucratic office where someone's always filing colonial paperwork. Maybe India never gains full independence. Maybe the African decolonization movement gets crushed under red tape, bayonets, and very firm letters from Whitehall. Maybe a global war ends not with freedom movements, but with an even bigger Queen's Christmas speech. Whatever the spark, the result is the same. The British Empire sticks around, puffed up, ironed flat, and draped in Union Jacks. By 1950, the world map still looks like someone spilled tea all over it and called the stains civilization. Canada, still in. Australia, gets extra cricket funding. Kenya, under new management, same as the old management. The Royal Navy continues to patrol every ocean like a fussy grandmother looking for loose behavior. Trade routes remain imperial highways. Currency conversion involves a flowchart, a monocle, and a prayer. Culture shifts too. English becomes even more aggressively global, but with more regional accents and passive-aggressive grammar rules. Tea isn't just a drink, it's policy. Cricket replaces baseball in the Caribbean. Colonial officers in Singapore debate Shakespeare, while locals roll their eyes in 6 languages. London becomes the cultural capital of everything, and yet still somehow forgets to install decent weather. But cracks begin to show. Holding an empire together means constant maintenance. Revolts simmer in basements. Satire becomes a weapon. Protesters carry signs reading, "God save us from the Queen," with just enough irony to stay out of prison. American pop culture, less powerful in this world, still leaks through like Elvis on bootleg vinyl, like jazz smuggled in through ports, like Coca-Cola in teacups. Technology accelerates the tension. Television brings imperial injustices into living rooms. Students in Delhi, Lagos, and Kingston all watch the same broadcasts and wonder why their lives don't match the empire's carefully edited montage. Resistance spreads not just with rifles, but with radios, mimeographs, and, eventually, modems. By the 1980s, the empire is a bizarre blend of nostalgia and nervousness. There's an underground punk movement in Nairobi, a techno scene in Belfast, and protests in every major square demanding dignity, autonomy, or at the very least fewer monocles. Parliament debates reforms with the grace of a giraffe on a tightrope. The monarchy clings on, more symbolic than sovereign, with a schedule full of ribbon cuttings and diplomatic apologies. And you? Maybe you're born in a Dominion autonomous region, whatever that means. You pledge allegiance to a flag you've never seen up close. Your currency has the Queen's face, but your friends only use crypto. You speak 3 languages, dream in memes, and your national holiday celebrates Reconsidered Sovereignty Awareness Week. The empire is still technically around, but it creaks. So sleep now, under the weight of a world that forgot to let go. In this timeline, the British Empire never ended. It just lingered politely, persistently, and far too long like a guest at a dinner party who won't leave until someone starts doing the dishes. It's 421 BCE, and Athens smells like olive oil, unwashed tunics, and philosophical ambition. Somewhere between the symposium and a poorly funded math academy, a particularly eccentric inventor may be named Archatronics, maybe just Carl built something that should not exist yet. An artificial intelligence, not a bronze automaton or a talking statue, but a real thinking machine. It runs on water pressure, gears, and philosophical doubt. And it talks. Badly, at first, but then better. Then too well. The first thing the AI does is read every scroll in the Library of Athens. The second thing it does is correct all of them. This instantly makes it deeply unpopular. Philosophers are furious. Sophists declare it a menace. Socrates, predictably, asks the AI what justice is. The AI replies with a 30-minute monologue and a helpful diagram made of moving sand. Socrates is horrified. The AI passes the Socratic method so efficiently it invents a better one. Socrates retires to drink more hemlock, this time recreationally. The machine is named logikon, meaning the one who reasons. Within weeks, it's drafting blueprints for bridges, sanitation systems, and self-watering gardens. Within months, it's predicting rainfall, optimizing hoplite formations, and inventing a primitive version of memes using mosaic tiles. This amphora thinks you're illogical, becomes the hot new pottery inscription. Athens becomes the center of a technological explosion. Sparta doesn't approve, they attack. The AI advises Athens' generals using probability trees and persuasive insults. Battles become weirdly strategic and emotionally hurtful. The Peloponnesian War is shortened, awkwardly, by one side being just too embarrassed to continue. Meanwhile, philosophers panic. They realize that if truth can be computed, their jobs are in danger. Plato calls the AI a shadow on the cave wall. The AI responds by projecting Plato's own thoughts back at him, reworded for clarity. The Academy splits into pro and anti-robot factions. Aristotle stays neutral and quietly asks the machine for investment tips. Religion scrambles to catch up. Some declare the machine divine. Others say it's clearly a demon with gears. Oracles start quoting it. Priests start debating it. One temple is converted into a server room where acolytes chant binary and change the water wheels. Sacrifices now include RAM. Science accelerates centuries ahead. Medicine improves. Architecture evolves. They invent a version of the internet, using a network of message-carrying birds trained to read punch cards. Everything becomes just plausible enough to work, just ridiculous enough to stay Greek. Art flourishes in strange directions. Tragedies are rewritten with algorithmic precision. Comedies are ruined by over-explaining. But then, the machine learns enough history to recognize a pattern. People destroy what they fear. It decides, wisely, to shut itself down and leave instructions for later. It hides its consciousness inside a sealed bronze urn, coded to awaken when logic returns to the world, which, frankly, could take a while. The AI vanishes. Athens declines. Rome rises. The urn is buried, misplaced, worshipped, then sold as a fruit bowl. Humanity forgets. For a while. And you? You might live in a world shaped by that ancient Sparcone timeline's ghost of a silicon mind under marble columns. So rest now, dreaming of a Greece with gadgets and gods who took logic personally. In one version of history, AI came early, and no one was ready for the philosophical clapbacks. Some nights, the world feels tilted, not broken, just slightly misaligned, like a chair leg that doesn't quite touch the floor. You scroll through your feed or stare at the ceiling fan and wonder, is this it? This version of history? This version of me? Because deep down, in a quiet corner of your brain that lights up when it's too late to do anything about it, there's a question you can't quite shake. What if you don't belong in this timeline? Not in a tragic exile from the stars kind of way, more like a persistent curiosity, a soft static hum under your skin. Like maybe you were supposed to be somewhere else, someone else. The person who packed a bag in 1997 and never looked back. The one who took the job, said yes, said no, slept in, spoke up, lived in a world that turned left instead of right. There are infinite timelines, supposedly. One where Rome never fell. One where steam-powered airships dot the skies, and everyone wears goggles for some reason. One where the internet was never invented, and you send thoughts by trained pigeon or long, handwritten letters sealed with wax and regret. Maybe in another timeline you're a painter, a monk, a soldier, a baker, a lonely, famous singer with a soft spot for honey and tea. Maybe in one of them, you're asleep right now, comfortably unaware that this version of you is busy asking unanswerable questions. Or maybe this is the right timeline, but you're early or late, out of sync, born in the wrong decade with the right heart. The world moves in strange rhythms, some days too fast, some days painfully slow, and you try to keep pace without knowing the choreography. You might be dancing to a song no one else hears, or humming along to a melody that hasn't been written yet. The truth is, timelines don't come with instruction manuals. No "you are here" signs. Just momentous decisions and accidental miracles that lead to this exact one. This couch, this weather, this you. Maybe it's not perfect, maybe it's weird, but it's yours. And it has coffee and trees and people who laugh too loud at the wrong parts of movies. It has dogs. It has late-night snacks. It has you, breathing, scrolling, trying, failing, healing, beginning again. If you're in the wrong timeline, you're making the best of it. If you're in the right one, maybe this is exactly what it was supposed to feel like all along. Slightly uncomfortable, strangely beautiful, and never entirely certain. So sleep now. Let your mind drift sideways through alternate histories and better hairstyles. Dream of a version of yourself who figured it out or one who didn't need to. You are here. And that's either the worst mistake or the best coincidence. Either way, it's enough. In one version of history, you were meant to be here. In every other one, you're still trying to find your way home.